The clock on the wall ticked past 2 in the morning, its faint clicks echoing through the sterile corridors of Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh, unforgiving glow that turned the linoleum floors into a sea of pale reflections. In a shadowed corner near the emergency ward, a man sat slumped on a hard plastic chair, his worn denim jacket draped over his shoulders like a shield against the chill. His hands, rough and calloused from endless nights of scrubbing, clutched a small inhaler as if it were a lifeline. Inside the room behind the glass doors, his 6-year-old daughter Ruby lay connected to a ventilator, her small chest rising and falling in labored rhythm. This was her third asthma attack in 2 months, each one more terrifying than the last. His name was Caleb Morris, a 35-year-old single father who worked the night shift as a janitor in the gleaming office towers of Manhattan. By day, he navigated the city's relentless hustle, mopping floors and emptying trash bins in buildings where executives in tailored suits barely noticed his existence. But at night like now, his world shrank to these hospital walls where he fought a different kind of battle. 3 years ago, life had been different. Caleb had been on track to become an engineer, buried in textbooks and blueprints at a local community college. Then came the diagnosis his wife Eleanor had ovarian cancer. The treatments drained their savings, and the endless hospital visits forced him to drop out. Eleanor had fought valiantly, her spirit unbroken, even as her body weakened. In her final days, surrounded by beeping machines and the scent of antiseptic, she had whispered to him, "If someone needs help, don't let them face it alone like I did." She passed away quietly one rainy afternoon, leaving Caleb with a mountain of debt and a toddler who inherited her mother's bright eyes, but also a fragile health. Ruby was his everything now. The reason he pushed through the exhaustion, the late-night shifts, and the gnawing fear that one day he might not be enough. Her asthma had worsened lately, triggered by the city's polluted air and their cramped apartment in Queens. Tonight's attack had come suddenly, her tiny voice gasping, "Daddy!" before she collapsed. Caleb had rushed her here, his heart pounding as doctors hooked her up to machines. He sat vigil, whispering promises to the empty air, willing her to breathe easier. Across the hall, 2 nurses huddled at the station, their voices low but carrying in the quiet night. She's got an empire of investments, billions at her fingertips, but now she needs a kidney to survive. And no one's come to visit, no family, no friends. It's like she's invisible to the world she built. Caleb lifted his head, his weary eyes narrowing. He had never heard of Madeline Price, the 40-year-old CEO of Stonebridge Capital, whose name graced headlines in the financial papers he sometimes glimpsed while cleaning. A woman who commanded boardrooms and shaped markets. Yet here she was, alone in an ICU upstairs, clinging to life through tubes and monitors. The nurse's words struck him like an echo from his past, the isolation Eleanor had endured, the way the world moved on while she faded. Why did it resonate so deeply? He wasn't sure. Perhaps it was the shared humanity and suffering, or the memory of Eleanor's plea. Whatever it was, it stirred something unbreakable inside him. Without a second thought, Caleb stood, his legs aching from hours of sitting. He approached the nurse's station, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "Excuse me," he said. "I'd like to get tested to see if I could donate a kidney to Ms. Price." The nurses exchanged stunned glances, one of them fumbling for a clipboard. "Sir, are you sure this is serious? It's not something you just decide on a whim." Caleb nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I'm sure. Let's get it done." As they led him down the hall for preliminary tests, he glanced back at Ruby's room, a silent vow forming in his mind. He didn't know Madeline Price, but in that moment, he knew loneliness too well to ignore it. 3 days had passed since that fateful night in the hospital corridor, but to Caleb Morris, it felt like an eternity stretched thin by worry and doubt. He sat in the small, cluttered office of Dr. Amelia Tran, the fluorescent lights above casting sharp shadows across the desk, littered with charts and files. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee, a reminder of the endless shifts he pulled just to keep afloat. His hands, still bearing faint smudges from his janitorial work, fidgeted with the hem of his faded shirt as the doctor reviewed the test results on her computer screen. "Mr. Morris," Dr. Tran began, her voice calm and measured, "I've gone over everything twice to be sure. You're a perfect match, a near-ideal donor for Ms. Price. The compatibility is remarkable, especially given the rarity of her blood type and tissue markers. This doesn't happen often. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. He stared at the floor, the linoleum tiles blurring as his mind raced. A perfect match for a woman he had never met, whose life existed in a realm of boardrooms and billions far removed from his world of mops and midnight shifts. Why had he even stepped forward? The question gnawed at him, a mix of impulse and something deeper, something he couldn't quite name. He wasn't a hero. He was just a father, scraping by, barely able to cover Ruby's medications, without dipping into the emergency fund he'd scraped together from odd jobs. As Dr. Tran explained the procedure, the surgery, the recovery time, the risks, Caleb's thoughts drifted back to Eleanor. 3 years ago, in a similar hospital room, not far from here, he had held her hand as the cancer claimed her piece by piece. She had been so strong even in her final moments, her voice a whisper amid the beeps of monitors. Caleb, she had said, her eyes locking onto his with a fierce clarity. If you ever see someone suffering alone like I did, don't turn away. Promise me you'll help if you can. He had nodded through tears, clutching her frail fingers, vowing to honor her memory. Eleanor's battle had isolated them both. Friends faded. Family was distant, and in the end, it was just the two of them against the world. Now, with Ruby's asthma mirroring that fragility, Caleb felt the weight of that promise more than ever. Madeline Price, alone in her ICU bed, despite her empire, echoed Eleanor's loneliness in a way that pierced him. I need to sign the papers, Caleb said, finally his voice steady despite the storm inside. Dr. Tran slid the forms across the desk, her expression a blend of admiration and concern. You're sure about this? No compensation, no recognition, just anonymous donation. It's generous, but the recovery could be tough. You'll be out of work for weeks. Caleb nodded, pen in hand. I'm sure. It's not about me. He signed with a firm stroke, the ink sealing a decision that defied logic. What would Ruby think if she knew she was too young to understand? But he imagined her wide eyes, her small hand in his, trusting him to make things right. Back in his routine, the days blurred into a haze of exhaustion. By night, he scrubbed the marble lobbies of Manhattan's skyscrapers, the hum of vacuum cleaners, his only companion. The buildings gleamed under his care, but he felt invisible, a shadow in the lives of the powerful. Mornings were, for Ruby, waking her with gentle kisses, preparing her nebulizer treatments, and rushing her to school before collapsing into bed. The medical bills piled up like unspoken accusations on his kitchen table, a constant reminder of how precarious their life was. What if the surgery went wrong? What if he couldn't work, and Ruby's next attack came without him there? The fears whispered in his mind, but so did Eleanor's voice urging him forward. As the surgery date approached, Caleb found himself in the hospital prep room, gowned and waiting. He pulled out a crumpled photo from his wallet, Eleanor smiling with baby Ruby in her arms. I'm keeping my promise, he murmured, tracing their faces with his thumb. In that quiet moment, amid the sterile beeps and distant footsteps, Caleb felt a rare peace. This wasn't about saving a stranger. It was about honoring the woman who had taught him that true strength lay in quiet acts of kindness, even when the world offered nothing in return. The door opened and the nurses wheeled him away, but his resolve held firm, a beacon in the uncertainty ahead. On the 11th floor of Mount Sinai Hospital, the world outside the window blurred into a tapestry of city lights and distant traffic hums. Madeline Price stirred in her bed, the sterile beep of monitors pulling her back from the haze of sedation. Her eyelids fluttered open, heavy with the aftermath of another emergency dialysis session. At 40, she was the unyielding force behind Stonebridge Capital, a hedge fund empire that manipulated billions with the flick of a decision. Her life had been a series of calculated risks, acquisitions, mergers, boardroom battles where she always emerged victorious. But now confined to this room, with tubes snaking into her arms and the metallic tang of medication in her mouth, she felt something foreign: vulnerability. The door creaked open and Dr. Tran entered, clipboard in hand. Madeline straightened as best she could, her sharp green eyes demanding answers even before words were spoken. How bad was it this time? She asked, her voice raspy but commanding. Dr. Tran pulled up a chair, her expression a mix of relief and gravity. Ms. Price, the session stabilized you, but your kidneys are failing faster than anticipated. We need a transplant soon. She paused, glancing at the chart. There's good news, though. We've found a donor a near-perfect match. The compatibility is extraordinary, and it's anonymous. No compensation requested, no strings attached. They just want to remain unidentified. Madeline's brow furrowed, a flicker of disbelief crossing her features. She had built her fortune on deals where nothing was free. Every favor came with a price tag, every alliance a ledger entry. Anonymous, she echoed, her tone laced with skepticism. People don't give away organs without wanting something. Recognition, money, leverage. Who's behind this? A competitor trying to play hero, or someone angling for a favor down the line? The doctor shook her head. We've vetted it thoroughly. The donor insisted on privacy. No contact, no details. They're recovering downstairs as we speak. Madeline leaned back against her pillows, her mind racing. Who would do such a thing? In her world, altruism was a myth, a tool for PR campaigns or tax write-offs. She had clawed her way up from a modest upbringing in Chicago, orphaning herself from family ties to focus on ambition. No siblings, no spouse relationships, were distractions, liabilities in the cutthroat arena of high finance. Her days were filled with conference calls and strategy sessions, her nights with solitary dinners in her penthouse overlooking Central Park. But now, staring at the IV drip, she confronted the isolation she had cultivated. Billions in assets, yet here she was, alone in a hospital bed, her life hanging on the whim of a stranger. Downstairs in a recovery room, bathed in soft morning light, Caleb lay still, the post-surgery ache throbbing in his side like a persistent drum. The incision burned with every breath, but he pushed through, his thoughts anchored on Ruby. She was at home, with a trusted neighbor, her asthma under control for now, but he worried about the days ahead. Would she understand why Daddy was away? He hadn't told anyone, not his co-workers, not even the few friends he had left. This act was his, alone, a quiet fulfillment of Eleanor's wish. As nurses checked his vitals, he closed his eyes, picturing her face the way she had smiled through her pain. Back upstairs, Madeleine's skepticism gave way to a restless curiosity. She demanded her assistant bring her laptop, her fingers flying over the keys as she scoured hospital records and donor databases discreetly, of course, through back channels. But every lead hit a wall. The anonymity was ironclad. Frustration mounted, a rare crack in her composure. Who was this person? A doctor? A philanthropist? Or someone ordinary, driven by motives she couldn't comprehend? As the hours ticked by, the reality sank in. This stranger was enduring pain surgery recovery scars for her. Not for glory or gain, but simply because. For the first time in years, tears welled in Madeleine's eyes, hot and unbidden. She wiped them away quickly, but the dam had broken. In the silence of her room, she whispered to the empty air, "Why me?" The question hung there unanswered as she gazed out the window at the awakening city. Below, lives intertwined in ways she had never paused to consider. Perhaps she thought money couldn't buy everything after all. In that moment of raw honesty, a seed of gratitude took root, challenging the fortress she had built around her heart. 2 weeks had slipped by since the surgery, each day a blur of healing and quiet determination for Caleb Morris. The incision on his side still pulled with every movement, a sharp reminder of the piece of himself he had given away. But he pushed through, returning to his night janitorial shifts as soon as the doctors cleared him. The towering structures of Manhattan demanded his labor, and bills didn't wait for recovery. Stonebridge Tower, with its 50 floors of polished glass and steel, was his latest assignment, a gleaming monument to wealth that he scrubbed clean under the cover of darkness. That particular evening, the building hummed with the low energy of after hours. Caleb moved methodically through the upper levels, his mop gliding across the marble floors, the scent of lemon polish mingling with the faint echo of his footsteps. At floor 50, the executive suite, he paused to wipe down the expansive windows overlooking the glittering skyline. The city sprawled below, like a sea of stars indifferent to the lives it cradled. As he buffed a smudge from the glass, the elevator dinged softly, its doors sliding open with a whisper. Out stepped Madeline Price, her silhouette sharp against the dim lobby lights. She was dressed in a tailored coat, her steps measured but purposeful, as if reclaiming her domain after too long an absence. Caleb froze for a split second, recognizing her from the fleeting glimpses in financial magazines he'd seen while emptying trash bins. She was slimmer than before, her face paler, but the air of command remained. Their eyes met unexpectedly, and she halted, her gaze lingering on him with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. "Thank you for keeping the building so clean," she said, her voice steady, but laced with something unspoken. It was a simple acknowledgement, yet it hung in the air like a question. Caleb lowered his eyes, focusing on the rag in his hand. "Just doing my job, ma'am," he replied, his tone humble and even. He straightened, wiping his palms on his uniform pants, aware of how rough they looked, calloused from years of manual work, marked by faint scars from old cuts. Madeline didn't move immediately. She studied him, her sharp mind piecing together fragments from the doctor's vague descriptions. A working-class donor, someone who blended into the background. The janitor before her fit too perfectly. The quiet strength, the unassuming demeanor. Could it be? She had spent sleepless nights wondering about the stranger who had saved her, replaying scenarios in her head. Part of her wanted to ask, to shatter the anonymity and demand answers. Why him? What drove a man like this to give so freely? But another part, the one softened by her brush with mortality, held back. Revealing it might complicate things, disrupt the fragile peace he seemed to guard. Down in Queens, Ruby sat at their small kitchen table, her crayons scattered like confetti. She was drawing a picture for Daddy, a stick-figure family under a sunny sky, her imagination filling the gaps left by illness and absence. "When Daddy comes home," she murmured to her stuffed bear, "I'll show him this." The neighbor checked in periodically, but Ruby's resilience mirrored her father's quiet enduring. Back in the tower, the silence stretched between Caleb and Madeline. He felt her scrutiny like a weight, his mind racing. If she knew what, then he didn't want gratitude or spotlight. This was for Eleanor, for the promise he'd made. Exposure could upend his simple life, draw attention he couldn't afford, with Ruby's needs looming. Finally, Madeline nodded, a subtle shift in her expression, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even respect. "Well, good night," she said softly, turning toward her office. "Good night, ma'am," Caleb echoed, watching as she walked away. At the door, she paused, glancing back over her shoulder. Their eyes met again, and in that brief exchange, something passed, an unspoken thank you, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond forged in secrecy. She offered a small, genuine smile before disappearing inside. Caleb exhaled, leaning against the window. The city lights twinkled below, unchanged. He picked up his mop and continued his work, the encounter lingering like a warm ember in the cold night. For the first time in years, he felt seen not as a janitor, but as a man who had made a difference. A month had passed since that fleeting encounter in the tower, the days weaving into a tapestry of routine and subtle healing for both Caleb and Madeline. The scar on Caleb's side had faded to a faint line, a private emblem of his choice, while his nights remained filled with the quiet rhythm of janitorial work. Ruby's asthma attacks had lessened her laughter, echoing more freely in their small apartment, a small mercy amid the ongoing struggle. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Caleb sorted through the mail, after picking her up from school, a plain envelope caught his eye. No return address, just his name scrawled in neat script. Inside was a letter from an organization he didn't recognize, the Eleanor Bloom Foundation. His heart skipped as he read the words: a full scholarship for Ruby, covering her medical expenses, education through high school, and even extracurricular activities until she turned 18. The fund was dedicated to supporting children with chronic illnesses, named after a beloved soul who taught the value of quiet kindness, and symbolized by the dahlia flower, Eleanor's favorite bloom. Caleb's hands trembled as he clutched the paper. How could they know? The details were too precise, the name, the flower. This wasn't coincidence. It was gratitude veiled and profound. He sat at the kitchen table, Ruby coloring nearby, oblivious to the storm of emotions in his chest. Madeline must have uncovered his identity somehow, perhaps through hospital whispers or a discreet inquiry. Yet she had respected his anonymity, responding not with direct confrontation, but with this act of reciprocity. It wasn't about money. It was about honoring what he had given, extending the chain of compassion to his daughter. For the first time since Eleanor's passing, Caleb felt a weight lift, a sense that his sacrifice had rippled outward, touching lives in ways he hadn't imagined. The Foundation's inaugural event was held at a newly opened pediatric health center in Midtown, a sleek building funded by Stonebridge Capital. Caleb attended quietly, slipping into the back row of the auditorium, his work clothes traded for a simple button-down shirt. The room buzzed with donors, doctors, and media, but his eyes fixed on the stage where Madeline stood, poised and recovered her presence, commanding as ever. She spoke with measured eloquence, her voice carrying through the speakers. Today, we open doors not just to treatment, but to hope. She began, her gaze sweeping the crowd. I've learned that true power isn't in wealth or influence, it's in the unseen acts that sustain us. There are people who give without fanfare, enduring pain to grant others a second chance. One such person reminded me that no one should face suffering alone. Their gift wasn't for sale, it was pure, unasked for, and it changed everything. We honor them not with names, but with action, building a legacy where kindness blooms eternal. As she paused, her eyes scanned the room and locked onto Caleb's amid the sea of faces. Time seemed to slow. No words passed, but the connection was electric. She offered a subtle nod, her expression softening into a genuine smile, a silent thank you laden with respect and depth. Caleb returned the gesture, a quiet affirmation that bridged their worlds. In that moment, the anonymity dissolved into mutual understanding, a bond forged in vulnerability and grace. Later, under the golden hues of Central Park, Caleb walked hand in hand with ruby leaves crunching beneath their feet. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of earth and possibility. Ruby skipped ahead, her drawing from earlier clutched in her small fist, a vibrant sketch of flowers and smiling figures. "Daddy, look what I made!" she exclaimed, holding it up. Caleb knelt, his eyes misting as he saw the dahlias she'd drawn. "It's beautiful, sweetheart, just like you." Ruby tilted her head, glancing back toward the direction of the city. That lady at the event, she looked like an angel, Daddy, the way she talked about helping people. Caleb pulled her into a gentle hug, his voice soft against her hair. "No angel. The real angel is your mom, the one who sent this light our way. She taught me to help others, and now it's blooming everywhere." As they sat on a bench watching the sun dip low, Caleb reflected on the journey. A simple act in a hospital corridor had mended not just a body, but fractured souls, reminding a powerful woman of humanity's worth, and a grieving father that his promises endured. In the end, it wasn't about repayment or recognition, it was about the quiet petals of kindness scattered to those left behind, proving that even in isolation, connections could heal.